I woke up in my own bed, in total darkness, feeling a body pressed firmly against mine. But it wasn't my boyfriend. At 4 o'clock in the morning, in the silence of a house that felt more like a prison than a home, I felt the unmistakable weight of a third person shifting under the covers. Have you ever had a moment where your brain simply refuses to process what your senses are telling you? A moment where the reality of your situation is so bizarre, so deeply wrong, that you just freeze, hoping it's a nightmare. That was the morning my life changed. That was the morning I realized that the woman who was supposed to be my future mother-in-law hadn't just lost her mind. She was trying to take mine with her. What followed was a spiral of psychological warfare, gaslighting, and a desperate struggle for survival that eventually involved the police, an ambulance, and a realization that some bonds aren't just broken, they're radioactive. To understand how I ended up squished against a cold bedroom wall while a 62-year-old woman curled up between me and my partner, you have to understand the year we had been living through. My boyfriend, who I'll call Tyrone, and I were just trying to build a life. I was 23, working as a preschool teacher, a job that requires every ounce of patience and emotional stability you possess. Tyrone was 22, working a grueling blue-collar job that left him exhausted and sleeping like a literal rock every night. We were young, we were tired, and we were trying to save money, which is why we were living in the downstairs area of his parents' house. It seemed like a logical move at the time, a stepping stone to our own place. But looking back, it was like moving into the eye of a hurricane. The storm's name was Karen. At 62, Karen was going through a divorce with Tyrone's father, a situation that turned their home into a battlefield of resentment and shattered nerves. Now, divorce is hard on everyone, I get that. But Karen didn't just go through a divorce, she weaponized it. She didn't just want sympathy, she wanted total emotional dominion over everyone in her orbit, especially Tyrone and me. We became her captive audience, her emotional punching bags, and her 24/7 support staff. The atmosphere in that house was thick, heavy with the kind of tension that makes your shoulders ache the second you pull into the driveway. Every day when I came home from the preschool, drained from a day of wrangling toddlers, I didn't find peace. I found Karen. She would be waiting. Sometimes she was a fountain of tears, sobbing about how her life was over and how her husband was a monster. Other times she was a whirlwind of rage, screaming at the walls, at the furniture, and eventually at us. She made us feel like we were nothing. She'd look us in the eye and tell us we were selfish for wanting a moment of privacy. Or she'd imply that our happiness was an insult to her suffering. Tyrone was caught in the middle. He's a good man, a loyal man, and seeing his mother crumble was tearing him apart. But it was also suffocating us. We were sleeping on a full-size bed. If you've ever shared a full-size bed with a grown man who works construction, you know there isn't an inch to spare. It's a tight fit. That bed was our only sanctuary, the only place where the world, and Karen, was supposed to stay out. But Karen didn't believe in boundaries. To her, a closed door wasn't a sign of privacy, it was a personal challenge. She started small. She would knock on our bedroom door at 11 p.m, then midnight, then 1 a.m. She'd have emergencies that couldn't wait. Sometimes she just wanted to talk. Sometimes she just wanted to cry. We would be lying there, desperately trying to get the 6 hours of sleep we needed to function at our jobs, and we'd hear that rhythmic thump, thump, thump on the wood. It was the sound of our boundaries being eroded, one knock at a time. We felt like we were drowning in her grief, and every time we tried to come up for air, she'd put her hand on our heads and push us back under. The night it happened started out like any other. The house was quiet, but it was that loaded kind of quiet, like the silence before a fuse hits the powder. Tyrone was out cold the second his head hit the pillow, his body heavy with the fatigue of a 12-hour shift. I was drifting, caught in that hazy middle ground between consciousness and sleep, grateful for the silence. Then, in the dead of night, I felt the bed shift. In my half-asleep state, I didn't think much of it. Tyrone tosses and turns. He's a big guy. When he moves, the whole mattress moves. I felt a weight settle into the middle of the bed, and I instinctively scooted over to give him more room. I was pressed up against the cold plaster of the wall, my eyes still shut, my mind already trying to dive back into a dream. I felt the heat of a body right behind me, the rhythmic breathing of someone who had just settled in. I assumed Tyrone had just moved to the center of the bed like he usually does. I reached back, expecting to feel his arm or his side, but something felt different. The person behind me was smaller. The texture of the clothing wasn't the rough cotton of Tyrone's t-shirts. My heart gave a tiny, frantic skip. I opened my eyes. The room was bathed in that weird, dim blue light that filters through cheap curtains at 4 a.m. I moved my head just a fraction of an inch and looked over my shoulder. There, curled in a tight fetal ball in the literal 6 inches of space between me and my boyfriend, was Karen. She was lying there, like a small child who had been scared by a thunderstorm, her eyes closed, her breathing shallow. She had crawled into our bed, under our covers, while we were sleeping. She had bypassed the door, ignored the fact that we were 2 grown adults in an intimate space, and decided that the middle of our bed was where she belonged. The shock was physical. It felt like a bucket of ice water had been dumped over my head. I didn't scream. I couldn't. My throat felt like it had been seized by a pair of invisible hands. I just stared at her. I looked at the back of Tyrone's head. He was still dead to the world, completely unaware that his mother was currently occupying the space where his ribs should have been touching mine. I lay there for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, my mind racing at 1,000 miles per hour. Is this actually happening? Am I having a breakdown? Who does this? What kind of person thinks this is an okay thing to do? I felt a wave of nausea. It wasn't just the invasion of privacy. It was the sheer, primal wrongness of it. It was the ultimate act of emotional colonization. She didn't just want our time. She wanted to be inside our most private sanctuary. I stayed pinned against that wall, shivering, waiting for the sun to come up or for Tyrone to wake up, whichever came first. I was terrified to move, terrified that if I touched her, she'd wake up and start one of her episodes, and I just didn't have the strength for it at 4 a.m. I felt like a stranger in my own life, watching a scene from a horror movie play out in my own bedroom. When the first rays of grey light started to bleed into the room, Tyrone finally began to stir. I watched him, my heart hammering against my ribs. I saw the moment his eyes opened. I saw the moment he realized he wasn't alone in the bed with just me. He shifted, his hand brushing against the figure in the middle, and he froze. He turned his head slowly, and I'll never forget the look of pure, unadulterated horror on his face. He looked at me, his eyes wide, silently asking the question I didn't have an answer to. How? Why? Karen chose that moment to wake up. She didn't act surprised. She didn't act ashamed. She looked at us with these watery, pathetic eyes and started whispering apologies that didn't sound like apologies at all. They sounded like a script. "I'm so sorry," she whimpered. "I just couldn't be alone. I was so scared. The house is so big and I felt so small." I couldn't speak. I literally could not find the words. I got out of bed, my legs shaking, and just started getting dressed for work. I moved like a robot. I could hear them talking behind me, but the sounds were muffled like I was underwater. We somehow made it through the morning routines, the 3 of us moving around each other in a kitchen that felt like it was shrinking. We went to work because that's what you do when your world is falling apart. You cling to the routine. But as I sat in my classroom that day, surrounded by the innocent laughter of toddlers, all I could think about was the feeling of her body taking up the space between me and the man I loved. I thought about leaving him, not because of him, but because of the shadow his mother cast over everything we touched. I thought about it 4 times before lunch. The day at the preschool was a blur of bright colours and plastic building blocks, a sharp, surreal contrast to the grey, suffocating reality of my morning. I remember sitting on one of those tiny plastic chairs, watching a group of 4-year-olds navigate a disagreement over a toy truck. They were so honest in their emotions, angry one second, sharing the next. There was a simplicity to their world that I suddenly craved with a physical ache. As a teacher, I was supposed to be the one providing stability and guidance, but inside I felt like I was vibrating at a frequency of pure anxiety. Every time a child hugged my knees or looked up at me with wide, trusting eyes, I felt a wave of guilt. How could I be here for them when my own foundation was turning into quicksand? I must have checked my phone 100 times that day. Tyrone and I didn't even text much. What was there to say? Your mum slept in our bed last night? Isn't exactly a conversation starter you can wrap your head around while you're on your lunch break. I found myself staring out the window at the playground, my mind replaying the image of Karen's face in that dim light over and over again. I thought about my car. I thought about driving away and never looking back. I loved Tyrone, I truly did. But this was beyond the scope of working through things. This was a fundamental violation of the pact we had made to be a unit, a couple, a sanctuary for each other. I felt like a guest in my own relationship, and the host was a woman who didn't know where she ended and her son began. When the school day finally ended, the dread of going home was so heavy, it felt like a physical weight on my chest. I sat in my car in the parking lot for 20 minutes, the engine idling, just breathing. I knew what was waiting for me. I knew that the minute I walked through that door, the air would change. I'd be back in the ringer. Walking into that house was like walking into a funeral that never ended. The smell of it hits you first. Stale coffee, the faint scent of Karen's perfume, and that unmistakable ozone-heavy feeling of a storm that refused to break. I headed down the stairs to our area, hoping for a moment of peace before the inevitable confrontation. But I wasn't that lucky. Karen was already there. She wasn't in her own part of the house. She was hovering near our door, her face a mask of calculated fragility. "Oh, you're home," she said, her voice trembling just enough to let me know she'd been practicing. "I've been waiting. I wanted to talk about this morning. I feel so terrible." But she didn't look terrible. She looked energized. That was the thing about Karen. She fed on the chaos. Her husband leaving her had left a void in her life, a massive, gaping hole of attention that she was determined to fill with our energy. She invited herself into our small living space and sat on the edge of the sofa, wringing her hands. Then came the gaslighting. It started subtly, a slow drip of poison. "I know it was a shock," she began, "but you have to understand the mental state I'm in. My husband of 30 years is throwing me away like trash. I'm losing everything. And then I come down here, hoping for a little comfort from my own son, and I feel like I'm being judged. I feel like you're both looking at me like I'm some kind of monster." I stood there, still in my work clothes, clutching my bag like a shield. "Karen," I said, trying to keep my voice even, "it's not about judging you. It's about boundaries. You can't just crawl into our bed. It's not normal." Her face shifted instantly. The fragility vanished, replaced by a sharp, cold indignation. "Normal? You want to talk to me about normal? After everything I've done for you two, letting you live here, giving you a roof over your head while you figure your lives out. And you're going to stand there and lecture me about normal while my life is falling apart?" She started to cry then. Not the quiet, dignified tears of someone in genuine pain, but those loud, performative sobs that are designed to make you stop talking and start apologizing. She told us we were making her feel bad about the divorce. She told us our coldness was making her depression worse. She twisted the entire situation until somehow I was the villain for wanting to sleep in my own bed without my mother-in-law tucked in next to me. It was masterful, in a horrifying sort of way. By the time Tyrone got home from his shift, she had managed to turn the entire house into a courtroom, where we were the defendants, and she was both the judge and the victim. Tyrone walked in, his face covered in the dust and grime of a long day on the job, his shoulders slumped. He looked at her, then at me, and I saw the light die in his eyes. He was so tired, not just physically tired, but soul tired. He had been dealing with her his whole life, and he was currently dealing with his own trauma, something that had happened to him years ago, a crime that had left him with scars that hadn't quite healed. He needed a home that was a fortress, but instead, he was living in a minefield. We spent that evening in a state of suspended animation. Karen wouldn't leave. She hovered. She commented on what we were cooking. She sighed loudly from the next room. She made sure we knew that she was suffering and that her suffering was our responsibility. That night, when we finally got into bed, the same bed from that morning, we didn't speak. We just lay there, both of us hyper-aware of the door. Every creak of the floorboards upstairs sounded like a footstep. Every shadow on the wall looked like a person. I didn't sleep more than an hour. I was waiting for the door to open. I was waiting for the weight of her to settle into the mattress again. The next few months were a cycle of this. She actually moved out for a short period, and for a few weeks, we breathed. We started to feel like a normal couple again. We laughed. We cooked meals together without looking over our shoulders. But then came August. The divorce proceedings were getting uglier, the money was getting tighter, and Karen, predictably, moved back in. She didn't just move back in. She moved back in with a vengeance. Whatever progress we had made in establishing boundaries was wiped clean. She was more demanding, more volatile, and more convinced than ever that we owed her our entire lives to make up for the fact that her husband didn't want her anymore. She would scream at us for the smallest things, a dish left in the sink, a light left on, or simply for looking too happy when she was feeling down. She was like a black hole, sucking all the light and joy out of the basement. I felt myself changing. I was becoming bitter, defensive, and constantly on edge. I was a preschool teacher who spent my days teaching children how to communicate and regulate their emotions. Yet I was living in a house where those concepts didn't exist. I was failing my own lessons. Tyrone was retreating further into himself, his work becoming his only escape. We were two people sharing a life, but we were being pulled apart by the gravitational force of his mother's instability. I remember one night in late August. The heat was stifling, and the air conditioning in the basement was barely keeping up. Karen had been on a tear all day, screaming about how we didn't appreciate her. I was sitting on the floor, trying to grade some papers, and I just stopped. I looked at Tyrone, who was staring blankly at the TV, and I realized we couldn't keep doing this. We were 22 and 23 years old. These were supposed to be the best years of our lives, the years where we were building our foundation. Instead, we were being buried alive. Tyrone, I whispered, we have to do something. We can't live like this. I can't live like this. He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something other than exhaustion. I saw a spark of genuine fear. I know, he said, his voice barely audible. I know, but she's my mother. Where is she going to go? What is she going to do? It doesn't matter, I said, the words feeling heavy and dangerous in the air. If she stays, there won't be an us left to save. She's destroying everything. We didn't know then that the situation was about to escalate far beyond screaming matches and invaded bedrooms. We didn't know that Karen's mental breakdown was reaching a fever pitch, or that the police and an ambulance were in our very near future. We were just two kids in a basement, trying to figure out how to survive a woman who had decided that if she couldn't have a happy life, no one else could either. That conversation in the sweltering heat of our basement was the turning point. But saying you're going to do something and actually doing it are two entirely different things. Walking on eggshells doesn't quite cover what it was like to live in that house. We were walking on broken glass, in the dark, barefoot. Every single day was a calculated game of survival. To really grasp the absolute madness we were dealing with, I have to touch on the ghost haunting the entire house. Tyrone's father. Now, my father-in-law's departure is a whole other saga, a chaotic mess of betrayal and explosive secrets that I could talk about for hours. But the short version is this. He didn't just ask for a divorce, he detonated a bomb in the middle of their 30-year marriage and walked away from the blast radius. He left Karen with a shattered reality, a mountain of unresolved issues, and a bitterness so deep it had essentially poisoned her soul. But instead of seeking professional help or leaning on friends, Karen turned her sights on the only man left in the house, her 22-year-old son. Psychologists have a term for it: emotional incest. It's when a parent relies on their child for the emotional support that should be provided by a partner. Karen didn't just want Tyrone to be her son, she wanted him to be her therapist, her confidant, her protector, and her emotional punching bag all rolled into one. And by extension, because I was the woman taking up his time and affection, I became public enemy number one. She resented me for having the relationship she was losing. She hated the fact that Tyrone's primary loyalty was shifting toward our future, rather than staying anchored to her past. As August bled into September, her behaviour went from manipulative to terrifyingly erratic. It was no longer just the crying fits or the midnight door locking. It was the complete deterioration of her grip on reality. I'd come home from the preschool, my ears still ringing from the joyous chaos of my classroom, only to find Karen sitting in the dark in our living area. No lights on, just sitting there in the dead silence, staring at the wall. When I'd reach for the light switch, my heart hammering in my throat, she'd snap her head toward me and start intensely whispering about how we were conspiring against her, how we were secretly laughing at her pain. I felt like I was losing my own mind. Have you ever been gaslit so relentlessly that you actually start to question your own memories? She would rearrange things in our living space, move my keys, hide Tyrone's work boots, throw away our mail, and when we asked her about it, she'd look at us with wide, innocent eyes and tell us we were going crazy. She'd say, "You're under so much stress, you're forgetting things. Maybe you need to see a doctor." It was psychological warfare. I was 23 years old, trying to build a career and a life with the man I loved, and instead I was trapped in a psychological thriller. My anxiety spiked to levels I didn't know were possible. My stomach was in a constant, painful knot. I started losing sleep, lying awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, waiting for the inevitable sound of her footsteps on the stairs. The dark circles under my eyes got so bad that one of my fellow teachers pulled me aside in the break room and asked if I was safe at home. And then there was Tyrone. Watching the man you love break down piece by piece is a special kind of agony. He was working incredibly hard, doing back-breaking blue-collar labour just to keep our heads above water. But his exhaustion was more than just physical. He was carrying a weight that no 22-year-old should have to bear. You see, Tyrone was already fighting a battle that no one could see. A few years prior, a severe crime had been committed against him. It was a deeply traumatic event, the kind of thing that shatters your sense of safety in the world. He had tried to get justice, tried to do everything right. But if you know anything about the legal system, you know it rarely favours the victims. The court system had chewed him up and spit him out, leaving him with deep psychological scars that he hadn't fully processed. He desperately needed therapy. He needed a safe haven. He needed peace to heal from a trauma that still haunted his nightmares. Instead, he was coming home to a mother who was actively terrorizing him. I remember finding him one evening, sitting on the edge of our full-size bed, his face buried in his calloused hands. His broad shoulders were shaking. I sat next to him and wrapped my arms around him, and he just collapsed into me. He didn't sob. It was a silent, suffocating kind of weeping. "I can't fix her," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I can't fix her, and I can't fix me, and I'm losing you." "You are not losing me," I told him fiercely, holding his face in my hands. "But we are losing this war. We have to get her out, or we have to leave. There is no door number 3, Tyrone. She is going to drag us down into the dark with her." He nodded, the realization finally settling in his bones. It was the hardest thing he ever had to accept. The fact that you cannot save someone who is determined to drown, especially when they are actively pulling you under the water with them. We started making a plan. We started quietly looking at apartments, trying to figure out how to break our lease, trying to scrape together every penny we had. We thought we had a little time to figure out the logistics. We thought we could just keep our heads down, avoid her as much as possible, and quietly slip out the back door of this nightmare. But Karen must have sensed the shift in our energy. Narcissists and emotionally unstable people have a sixth sense for when their victims are pulling away. The moment she realized that her grip on us was slipping, that we were no longer feeding into her endless cycle of drama and despair, something inside her finally snapped. The low-level harassment escalated into pure, unadulterated chaos. The air in the house turned electric, heavy with the terrifying promise that something was about to give. The whispers in the dark turned into screaming matches that shook the floorboards. The passive-aggressive comments turned into direct, vicious attacks. We didn't know it, but we were on a collision course with a night that would end with flashing red and blue lights illuminating our driveway. A night that would finally force the issue out of our hands and into the hands of the authorities. The breaking point didn't come with a grand cinematic explosion. It came on a Tuesday. It's always a Tuesday, isn't it? Just an ordinary, exhausting day where you think you can't possibly handle one more ounce of stress. And then the universe decides to test that theory. Tyrone and I had been quietly packing our things into garbage bags and shoving them into the back of my car under the cover of darkness. We had found a tiny, overpriced apartment across town, barely more than a shoebox, but to us, it looked like a castle. It was going to be ours, and more importantly, it was going to be Karen-free. We just needed a few more days to get the deposit together, but Karen knew. I don't know if she went through our trash or if she noticed the missing framed photos from our dresser, or if she simply possessed that terrifying radar that manipulative people have when their supply is drying up. Whatever it was, she decided that if she was going down, she was taking the house down with her. I came home from the preschool early that afternoon. One of my kids had thrown up, and I had caught whatever bug it was. I just wanted to crawl into my tiny half of the full-size bed, pull the covers over my head, and sleep for 12 hours. As I walked down the stairs, the air in the basement felt wrong. It was thick, heavy, and smelled faintly of burning plastic. I pushed open the door to our living area and stopped dead in my tracks. The room looked like a tornado had touched down inside it. Every single drawer in our dresser had been pulled out and dumped onto the floor. My clothes, Tyrone's work gear, our private papers, everything was scattered in a chaotic mess. The framed picture of Tyrone and me from our first anniversary was smashed on the floor, the glass glittering maliciously in the dim light. And in the center of it all stood Karen. She was holding a pair of my scissors, methodically cutting the straps off my favorite tote bag. She wasn't frantic. She was completely calm, her movements deliberate and terrifyingly slow. She didn't even look up when I walked in. "Karen," I breathed, my voice barely more than a croak. "What are you doing?" She slowly turned her head, and the look in her eyes sent a spike of pure, primal ice straight into my heart. There was no recognition there. The crying, needy woman who had curled up in our bed was gone. The angry, yelling woman who blamed us for her divorce was gone. This woman was completely hollowed out, empty and dangerous. "You're leaving me," she said, her voice flat, devoid of any inflection. "Just like him. You think you can just pack up and walk away after everything I've done for you? After I gave you a home?" "Karen, put the scissors down," I said, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I slowly backed toward the door. I was 23, 5'4", and staring at a woman who had completely detached from reality. "You're not taking him from me," she continued, taking a step toward me, the scissors still gripped tightly in her hand. "He's my son. He belongs here. You're the problem. You're the reason he doesn't love me anymore." The absurdity of the accusation barely registered over the roaring in my ears. I didn't try to reason with her. You can't reason with a mental break. I turned and sprinted up the stairs, my sick stomach forgotten, adrenaline flooding my system. I slammed the front door behind me, ran to my car, and locked the doors. My hands were shaking so violently I dropped my phone twice before I managed to dial Tyrone. "Tyrone!" I gasped when he picked up, the background noise of machinery almost drowning me out. "You need to come home, now. It's your mum. She destroyed our room. She had scissors. I think she's completely lost her mind." I heard the heavy silence on the other end of the line, followed by a string of curses that told me he understood exactly what I was saying. "I'm on my way," he said, his voice tight. "Stay in the car. Do not go back inside." I sat in the driveway for 20 minutes, watching the front door, terrified she was going to come out. When Tyrone's truck finally roared down the street and skidded to a halt, I practically fell out of my car. He didn't even stop to talk to me. He sprinted past me, his face a mask of furious determination, and kicked the front door open. I followed him cautiously, staying near the entrance. I heard him thundering down the stairs, and then the screaming started. It wasn't the usual arguing. It was a chaotic, guttural sound. The sound of a son confronting the absolute disintegration of his mother, and the sound of a mother who had nothing left to lose. "What is wrong with you?" Tyrone roared, his voice cracking with a mixture of rage and profound grief. "Look at this! Look at what you did! I'm saving you!" Karen shrieked back, the sound echoing up the stairwell like a physical blow. "She's ruining you! I'm the only one who cares about you!" Then came the sound of something heavy smashing against the wall, followed by a terrifying, heavy thud. I didn't hesitate. My fingers flew across my phone screen, dialing 911. My voice shook as I told the dispatcher that I needed police and an ambulance at our address immediately, that there was a violent domestic disturbance, and that I believed the woman inside was having a severe mental breakdown and was a danger to herself and others. The next 10 minutes were the longest of my life. Tyrone came stumbling up the stairs, his breathing ragged, a bloody scratch down the side of his face. He looked at me, his eyes wide and haunted. "I couldn't stop her," he whispered, leaning heavily against the doorframe. "She started throwing things. She collapsed. She's just sitting down there, rocking back and forth. I don't know what to do." "I called them," I said, reaching out to touch his arm. "They're coming. It's out of our hands now." When the police arrived, they moved with a practiced efficiency that was jarring against the chaos of our reality. They went downstairs, and within minutes the screaming started again. But this time, it wasn't directed at us. Karen fought the officers. She screamed obscenities, accused them of being part of a conspiracy, and flailed wildly as they tried to restrain her. I stood in the driveway with Tyrone, his arm wrapped tightly around my waist, watching as the EMTs wheeled a stretcher out of the front door. Karen was strapped to it, her face contorted in a mask of pure fury, still screaming at the top of her lungs. She looked right at us as they loaded her into the back of the ambulance. But she didn't see her son. She just saw enemies. The red and blue lights painted our exhausted faces as the ambulance pulled away, followed closely by a police cruiser. The silence that settled over the house afterward was deafening. It wasn't peaceful. It was the heavy, shell-shocked silence of a battlefield after the shooting stops. We went back down into the basement. The destruction was absolute. We spent the rest of the night packing whatever wasn't destroyed, stepping over the debris of the life we had tried so hard to build in that tiny space. We didn't sleep. We couldn't. That night changed everything. It forced the issue in the most violent, traumatic way possible. But it also broke the spell. The ringer was finally empty. We were out. But the story didn't end there. Because getting out of the house is one thing. Getting the house out of your head is entirely another. The silence in the basement that night was different from any silence I had ever known. It wasn't the heavy, suffocating quiet of a house under siege. It was the hollow, ringing silence of a place that had finally been emptied. The police had taken her, the ambulance had hauled her away, and for the first time in over a year, the air in that basement didn't feel like it was vibrating with her toxicity. Tyrone sat on the floor, amidst the wreckage of our life. The shattered glass of our picture frame, my shredded tote bag, the clothes she had ripped from the hangers. He didn't say a word. He just picked up a piece of the broken frame and turned it over in his hands, his knuckles white. I sat down next to him, leaning my head against his shoulder. We were both 22 and 23, and we looked like people who had been through a war. "She's gone," I whispered, the words feeling fragile. "She's not gone," he corrected me, his voice a low, gravelly rasp. "She's just somewhere else. She's still my mother, and she's still sick." That was the reality we had to face. You don't just fix a breakdown like that. You don't just wash the walls and move on. The trauma she had inflicted, the gaslighting, the stalking, the emotional suffocation, it had all seeped into our bones. We moved out the very next day. We didn't even bother with the security deposit. We grabbed our clothes, our essentials, and we drove away from that house, not once looking back in the rearview mirror. When we unlocked the door to our tiny shoebox apartment across town, it smelled like floor cleaner and dust, and to us, it was the most beautiful thing we had ever smelled. But the after wasn't a fairy tale. The first few months were brutal. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, my heart pounding, convinced I heard a knock on the door. Every time the phone rang, I'd flinch, expecting it to be her, or one of her flying monkeys, or a lawyer, or the hospital. My anxiety was so high, I felt like I was vibrating out of my skin. I went back to therapy. After 3 years of trying to muscle through it, I finally had to admit that I was broken. I had to learn how to exist in a space where I didn't have to watch my back every second. I had to learn what a boundary actually felt like, that it wasn't just a word, but a wall you build to protect your soul. Tyrone was having an even harder time. That crime that happened to him years ago, the one the court system failed him on, it started to surface in his nightmares. Without the distraction of his mother's chaos, all that buried trauma began to bubble up. He started having panic attacks on his way to work. He'd come home and just sit in the dark, unable to articulate the horrors that his mind was replaying. He finally started looking for a therapist who specialized in trauma, but the wait lists were months long. We were navigating the wreckage of 2 different lives, and for a while, it felt like we were just 2 drowning people clinging to a single, flimsy piece of driftwood. And then the news came. A few months later, we found out Karen had been arrested. It wasn't a surprise, really. People like that don't just get better because they're put in an ambulance. They get better when they hit rock bottom, and Karen was still plummeting. I won't go into the details of the arrest. It was just another sad chapter in a book of tragedies. But hearing it gave us a weird sense of finality. It confirmed that we had made the right choice. If we had stayed, we would have been collateral damage in her self-destruction. That was when the question started popping up in my head. The one I used to ask myself every day. Am I an idiot if I keep a low-contact relationship with her now? At first, I thought I was crazy for even considering it. She had traumatized me. She had invaded my bed. She had threatened my sanity. She had tried to ruin our relationship. Why would I ever want her back in my life, even at a distance. But then I realized that low contact isn't about her. It's about us. It's about control. When you go no contact, you're often still playing by their rules, reacting to their chaos, guarding the gates, constantly bracing for the impact. But low contact is different. It's an exercise in power. It's saying, you are a part of my history, but you have absolutely no say in my future. We started to see her progress, or what passed for it. She was in therapy, she was medicated. She was, in her own way, trying to navigate the mess she had made. And honestly, she did some bizarre things. She even invested in a giant Grinch. Don't ask me why. Some people express their strange mental states in even stranger ways. But there it was, this massive, looming statue in her new place. It was a bizarre, almost humorous reminder of how far she had fallen and how far she was trying to climb back. Tyrone and I are still together. 5 years now. We've grown up so much. We aren't the same two kids who were squished against that bedroom wall in the dark. We're partners. We've fought, we've cried, we've gone to therapy, and we've rebuilt ourselves from the ground up. We're stronger because we survived the fire, but we're also different. We're more cautious. We're more private. We know that a home is only as safe as the people you let inside it. We keep it low contact, a text here and there, a controlled visit once in a blue moon. It's not a warm, fuzzy mother-son relationship. It's a guarded, distant, and carefully managed arrangement. And you know what? That's okay. It's enough. Looking back at that year, I realized the most important thing I learned wasn't how to handle a narcissist or how to deal with a crisis. It was how to love someone through the absolute worst version of their life without losing my own. Tyrone and I, we're the real ones who won. We didn't let her madness define us, and we didn't let her trauma become our inheritance. Sometimes, when I'm lying in my own bed, in the quiet of our own home, I reach out and touch the space beside me. It's just Tyrone there. No ghosts, no monsters, no shadows. Just us. And in that moment, I know we made it. We survived the storm, and we're still here, standing on solid ground. I know a lot of you might be wondering, could you ever forgive someone like that? Could you keep a door cracked open when you know they're capable of burning the house down? It's a heavy question. Some of you might say I'm crazy for even speaking to her, that the only way to heal is to burn every bridge. Others might understand the complicated, messy reality of loving someone who is fundamentally broken. I'd love to hear what you think. If you were in my shoes after everything she did, would you have cut her off completely? Or would you have tried to maintain that sliver of contact just to keep the peace? Drop a comment below. I'm genuinely curious how you'd navigate that kind of minefield. And if you're going through something similar, if you're trapped in a cycle of toxic family expectations, or dealing with someone who thinks they own your privacy, just know this. You aren't an idiot for wanting to be kind, but you aren't a saint for letting them hurt you. Prioritize your peace. Build your walls. And if you enjoyed this story and want to hear more about how we navigated the long road to recovery, make sure to hit that subscribe button. We've got a lot more to talk about when it comes to setting boundaries and reclaiming your life. When people ask me how I can still have any relationship with her, even a low contact, highly filtered, arm's length arrangement, they usually look at me like I've lost my mind. I get it. I really do. From the outside, looking in at the chaos of that year, the logical, healthy thing to do seems so obvious. Pack your bags, change your number, and never look back. Why keep even the thinnest, most fragile thread of connection to someone who tried to dismantle your entire world? But the reality of dealing with family, especially someone like Karen, is never black and white. It's a messy, grey landscape of obligation, guilt, and, for Tyrone, a lifetime of history that he isn't quite ready to delete. And honestly, being the person who stands by him while he navigates that, It's its own kind of education. We've had some truly surreal moments since we moved out. You'd think the drama would have evaporated once we had our own front door, but trauma has a way of lingering in the air like smoke. There was a time, about 2 years into our low-contact experiment, where we tried to have a holiday dinner. We thought, okay, she's in therapy, she's on medication, let's see if we can be adults. We met at a neutral location, a restaurant. I remember sitting there, watching her drink her water, and for a split second, she looked like a regular, perfectly normal woman. Then, she started talking about how she decorated her living room, and she mentioned, with total seriousness, that she had bought a giant Grinch to put in her living room. I'm talking a 6-foot-tall, life-sized Grinch. She said it made her feel less lonely. Tyrone and I just exchanged a look. It wasn't a look of judgment, it was a look of weary recognition. That Grinch was a symbol. It was a manifestation of her inner world, a lonely, bitter creature that she had decided to invite into her home, just like she used to invite herself into ours. It was a bizarre, almost tragic detail that reminded us exactly why we needed the distance. We didn't laugh, and we didn't mock her. We just nodded, acknowledged the Grinch, and kept the conversation on the weather and the price of gas. That's the art of low contact. You become a master of the mundane. You stick to the scripts that keep the peace, and you never, ever let the conversation veer into the deep, dangerous waters of us, or our relationship, or the past. But that isn't to say it's easy. There are nights when the triggers hit hard. I'll be at school, helping a child with a zipper, and I'll suddenly be transported back to that 4 a.m. terror, the feeling of that mattress sinking as she crawled in. Or Tyrone will have a bad day at work, and I can see the old, familiar weight returning to his shoulders. He's still in therapy, working through the aftermath of that crime from his past, and I'm still there with him. We've become each other's anchors. What I've learned, and what I really want you to take away from this, is that healing isn't a destination. It's a practice. It's something you do every single day. For us, healing meant recognizing that Karen's breakdown was a tragedy, but it didn't have to be our tragedy. We had to learn to grieve the mother Tyrone deserved, but never had, and the mother-in-law I wanted, but would never get. Once we let go of that hope, the hope that she would one day wake up, realize everything, and become the person we needed, the low-contact model actually started to feel like freedom. We don't go there. She doesn't come here. We don't share our secrets, our finances, or our deepest struggles. We are kind, we are polite, and we are completely, utterly detached. It's not a family relationship anymore. It's more like a professional courtesy. And for us, it works. It keeps the chaos at bay and gives us the space to breathe, to love each other, and to be the people we were meant to be before we were swallowed by her storm. I see so many people in the comments of these kinds of stories asking, how do you do it? Why not just block her? And to those people I say, you are absolutely right to feel that way. If cutting the cord completely is what you need to save your life, then do it. Don't look back. Don't feel guilty. Your peace is the most valuable thing you own. But for some of us, the path out is a winding one. And sometimes, keeping a tiny, controlled light on in the distance is what helps you find your way through the woods. We are currently 5 years in. 5 years of building a life that is ours alone. 5 years of waking up in a bed that is just for us. 5 years of learning that you can love your family, even from a distance, without letting them burn you down. I'm curious, though. If you were in our position, having seen the way she destroyed our sanctuary and forced us into that confrontation, would you have left the door cracked open for low contact? Or would you have slammed it shut, locked it, and buried the key? Does the fact that she was going through a mental breakdown change your perspective at all? Or does the damage she caused make any contact feel like an insult to your own healing? Let me know in the comments. I read them, and honestly, Seeing how others handle these impossible family dynamics is the best therapy I've had. And if you found value in our story, if it helped you feel a little less alone in your own battle for peace, hit that subscribe button. We're still navigating this, still growing, and there is so much more to share about what happens when you finally decide that your happiness is worth more than someone else's expectation of you. We're here. We're happy. And for the first time in a long time, we are safe. It is strange how, even after 5 years of living our own lives, the memory of that house, that specific cursed basement, still feels like a ghost that lives in the back of my mind. People often ask me if time truly heals everything, and honestly, that's a lie. Time doesn't heal you. It just gives you enough space and perspective to build new things on top of the ruins of the old ones. The ruins are still there, underneath the foundation of the home Tyrone and I have built together. We just don't have to live inside them anymore. Reflecting on the entire ordeal, I've realized that the hardest part wasn't the screaming, the police, or even the terrifying night she crawled into our bed. The hardest part was the slow, agonizing realization that the person you thought you knew, the person who was supposed to be a constant in your life, was actually a stranger, living in a fortress of her own delusions. It was the moment I stopped looking at her as my boyfriend's mum and started looking at her as a human being who had completely disconnected from reality. I've had a lot of time to think about the low contact label we use. It sounds so clinical, doesn't it? Like something you'd find on a medical chart. But for us, it's been our survival strategy. It's the fence we built around our sanity. When we text her, it's brief, it's polite, it's devoid of any emotional vulnerability. We don't share our joys because she would only try to steal them. We don't share our struggles because she would only try to amplify them. We treat her like a distant acquaintance, someone you might wave to at a grocery store, but never invite to your dinner table. Some people call that grey rocking, making yourself so boring, so unreactive that the toxic person eventually gets bored and looks for a more stimulating target. And to an extent, that's exactly what it is. By refusing to give her the emotional highs and lows she craves, we've effectively made ourselves invisible to her inner turmoil. She has her Grinch, she has her therapy, and she has her own life. We have our small, quiet, peaceful apartment. We have our jobs. We have our healing. And let's talk about that healing for a second. Tyrone's journey has been the most profound thing I've ever witnessed. Watching him go from a man who was completely crushed by the expectations of a mother who couldn't love him properly, to a man who stands tall, who sets his own boundaries, and who finally sought the professional help he needed for the trauma she and others had inflicted on him. It has been the privilege of my life to stand by his side. We weren't just running away from her, we were running toward ourselves. We've had moments where we almost broke under the pressure. I remember a night about 2 years ago where we sat on our couch and talked about whether we should just go no contact entirely. It was a long, heavy conversation. We looked at the pros and the cons. We looked at the guilt that would follow, the inevitable flying monkeys, the other family members who don't understand the full scope of what happened and who would inevitably try to guilt trip us into forgiving and forgetting. We realized that for us, the low contact boundary was actually a stronger shield than no contact would have been. It gave us the illusion of control, and for people who have been victims of chaos, control is the most precious commodity in the world. I know that not everyone agrees with that. I've read the comments from people who say that by keeping even a sliver of contact, I'm just waiting for the next catastrophe. And maybe they're right. But I've also read the comments from people who say that they have family members who are just like Karen. Broken, struggling, and fundamentally incapable of being normal. And that keeping them at a distance is the only way to maintain a relationship at all. Whatever your stance, I want you to know one thing. You are the expert on your own life. No one else has to sleep in that bed at 4 a.m. No one else has to listen to the screaming or deal with the fallout of a mental breakdown. When you are the one living it, you get to decide what healthy looks like for you. If that means never speaking to them again, you have that right. If that means a very limited, very controlled, very distant dynamic, you have that right too. As for us, we're happy. We're finally, truly happy. We have a life that is our own. We have a relationship that has been tested in the fires of hell and come out stronger on the other side. And every single night, when I climb into that full-size bed, I don't look at the space behind me with fear. I look at it with gratitude. Because it's empty, it's safe, and it's mine. If you're listening to this and you're currently in the middle of your own storm, I want to leave you with this. The storm will end. It might end with a bang, it might end with a whimper, or it might end when you finally find the strength to walk out the front door and never look back. But you will get to the other side. You are stronger than the chaos that surrounds you, and you deserve a life that is filled with peace, not performance. The journey to where we are now, this quiet, beautiful stability, wasn't a straight line. It was a jagged, uphill climb through a landscape of landmines. When I look back at that final night, the night the ambulance sirens wailed in the distance and the red and blue lights pulsed against the siding of that house, I don't just see a crisis. I see the exact moment we reclaimed our own lives. People ask me, how do you do it? How do you forgive someone who shattered your sense of safety? And I have to be honest, forgiveness isn't really the point. Forgiveness is a word people use to make themselves feel better about the past. What we found wasn't forgiveness, it was indifference. We reached a point where her actions, her grinches, her late-night meltdowns, and her desperate need for control simply didn't matter anymore. They became background noise, like the hum of a refrigerator or the sound of traffic outside our window. That indifference is the ultimate form of protection. When you stop reacting to someone's volatility, you stop being their target. You stop feeding their need for drama. And let me tell you, when you starve a narcissist or an emotionally unstable person of the reactions they crave, the power dynamic shifts permanently. We aren't the ones in the ringer anymore. We are the ones outside of it, watching from a distance, secure in our own little world. I remember a specific conversation Tyrone and I had shortly after we officially low-contacted her for good. We were sitting at our kitchen table, not a basement table, not a temporary desk, but our own dining table, and we were just talking about the future. For years, the future had been a terrifying concept. We were so busy surviving the present that we couldn't even imagine what the next week would look like, let alone the next year. But sitting there, with the sun streaming through the window and absolutely no fear of a knock on the door, we realized we were making plans. We were talking about travel, about our careers, about the kind of home we wanted to buy one day. That shift from survival to living is something you can't truly explain until you've been on the other side of a trauma. It's like emerging from a dark cave into the blinding sunlight. You have to squint for a while. You have to learn how to see again. Tyrone is different now. The man who sat in the dark and cried because he thought he was losing his mind has been replaced by a man who is incredibly sure of himself. He's gone through the ringer of the court system, he's gone through the ringer of his own past, and he's gone through the ringer of his mother's breakdown. And he's still standing. He's more patient, he's more empathetic, and he is fiercely protective of our peace. We have this unspoken rule. If it threatens our joy, it doesn't get inside. It stays on the other side of the door. I've learned so much about the nature of boundaries. We always hear that phrase, set boundaries. But nobody tells you how hard it is to maintain them when the person on the other side is trying to claw through them. Boundaries aren't just polite requests. They are acts of war. They are you standing your ground and saying, this is where I end, and this is where you stop. It felt mean at first. I felt guilty for a long time. I felt like I was being cruel to a woman who was clearly suffering. But then I remembered the way she looked at me when she held those scissors, the way she made me feel like an intruder in my own life. I realized that being kind to her at the expense of my own sanity wasn't kindness. It was self-destruction. I'm sharing this now because I know there are thousands of people out there living in a basement, a spare bedroom, or just a suffocating relationship where they feel like they're losing their grip on who they are. You might be listening to this thinking, is it really that bad? Maybe I'm just overreacting. Let me tell you, if you're asking yourself that, you're not overreacting. Your instincts are telling you something is wrong for a reason. You deserve a life that isn't built on someone else's misery. We're still here, we're still working on ourselves, and we're still protecting our peace with everything we have. We're in a place where we can look at the past, acknowledge the pain, and choose not to let it dictate our future. It's not a perfect life, but it's an authentic one. And for two people who almost lost everything to a woman's breakdown, authentic and peaceful is more than enough. I want to thank you for listening to this, for walking through this long, winding, sometimes painful story with me. It's been healing to put these words down, to look at the puzzle pieces of our past and finally see the full picture. If you ever feel like you're trapped in a similar cycle, remember that you have the power to break it. You have the power to walk out. And you have the power to build a life that is yours, and yours alone. We're still navigating this, still growing, and there is so much more to share about what happens when you finally decide that your happiness is worth more than someone else's expectation of you. If this resonated with you, if it gave you a little bit of the strength you needed today, please subscribe. Let's keep building this community of people who choose their own peace over someone else's chaos. And for the last time, I want to hear from you. After everything you've heard, what would you have done? Would you have stayed? Would you have left? Or would you have built that wall of silence even higher than we did? Your perspective matters, and I'll be in the comments reading every single one. Thank you for being part of our story. And thank you for being a reminder that we are never truly alone, even when the world feels like it's falling apart. As I sit here today, later, looking back at the wreckage of that basement, it feels like I'm describing a movie I once watched, rather than a life I actually lived. It is strange how the brain protects you, how it takes the sharp, jagged edges of trauma and dulls them over time, turning the screams and the fear into a hazy, muted memory. But then, there are moments where the clarity hits, and I am reminded that the stakes were never just about moving house or setting a boundary. The stakes were about whether or not we would survive the person who was supposed to be our guardian. There is a profound, quiet power in choosing to exist without drama. For a long time, Tyrone and I felt like we were addicts, addicted to the adrenaline of the next disaster. When things were calm, we were suspicious. We waited for the other shoe to drop. We waited for the phone to ring with some new crisis, some new emergency that would force us back into the fray. It took us years of conscious, deliberate effort to unlearn that survival instinct. We had to learn how to be bored. We had to learn how to be content with a quiet Tuesday night where nothing happened, and where no one pounded on our bedroom door at 4 a.m. The low-contact dynamic we maintain is in many ways an act of mercy for her, and an act of necessity for us. We don't owe her our vulnerability, and we don't owe her our emotional bandwidth. We give her the bare minimum of societal grace, a card on her birthday, a polite nod at a rare, controlled gathering, and in exchange, we keep our peace. It isn't a relationship in the traditional sense, it's a boundary marker. It says, we see you, we acknowledge you exist, but you are not allowed to touch our lives. I've often wondered what she thinks when she sits in her room with her giant, silent Grinch. Does she ever look back at that night with the police and the ambulance and feel regret? Does she understand that she didn't lose her son to a bad influence, but rather to her own inability to respect him as an independent human being? I'll probably never know, and the liberating part is that I no longer care. Whether she understands or not is irrelevant to the life we have built. If there is one thing I want anyone reading this to internalize, It's that you are the architect of your own sanctuary. If you are currently in a space, physical, emotional, or familial, that is being systematically torn apart by someone else's instability, you are not a bad person for wanting to leave. You are not a failure for setting a boundary. You are simply a human being trying to keep your own light from being extinguished by someone else's darkness. The court system, the mental health system, the family dynamics, they were all stacked against us. We were young, we were poor, and we were dealing with the weight of intergenerational trauma. But we had each other, and that, in the end, was the deciding factor. We were a team. We didn't allow her to turn us against each other, even when she worked so hard to sow those seeds of doubt. We stayed together because we realized that the us we were building was stronger than the her that was trying to tear it down. Looking ahead, I feel nothing but optimism. We have our little apartment, we have our peace, and we have the knowledge that we can withstand anything. We have been through the fire, and we didn't burn. We were forged. And as we continue to move forward, to grow, and to define what family really means to us, I feel a sense of peace that I wouldn't trade for the world. If you are fighting for your peace today, keep fighting. Don't let anyone minimize your pain, and don't let anyone convince you that you owe them your soul just because you share a bloodline or a history. You are the owner of your life. Make sure you're the one living it. Thank you for staying with me through this. Thank you for listening to the story of how we found our way out of the dark. If this story has helped you, or if you just want to support us on our journey to keep building a life of our own, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment below. I'll be there, and I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts and your own stories of reclaiming your space. We are all in this together, and every single one of us deserves a home where we can sleep without fear, wake up without anxiety, and live without the shadow of someone else's chaos. We made it, and so can you.